Y'all, we live in difficult times. There's war, political unrest, the pandemic, poverty, families being torn, communities ripped by gun violence and people dying every day, police, injustice. It's all bringing so much pain. But y'all, we can look inside our minds and we can understand who we are, become better, and do this thing like we've never done it before. But it all starts with our mental health, and I know we can do it. I believe in you because I believe in me, and I believe in us. Hello, my name is Gerald McGee, clinical therapist and social worker of Everyday People Individual and Family Counseling Center, LLC, located in the Shore Cultural Center, the red building in the middle. And thank you for being back for another episode of Therapy is Life, thinking, feeling, and experiencing well-being. And today we're going to be discussing grief. This is an issue that impacts everybody's life. So sit back, embrace this discussion, because it will eventually be a situation that if you haven't already experienced, you will experience. First, before we get into that discussion, I would like to do our attitude of gratitude. And today we're going to be going with celebrating your time. Don't assume that you will live a certain number of days, live a long life. Don't assume we have all the time in the world. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we do know we're here today, and we should celebrate our life experiences, the good with the bad. Celebrate it because it's the journey. It is what we go through, the ups and downs. We celebrate them so we can look at our life and feel good about it, because we can't guarantee what tomorrow brings, but we can have some joy for what we experience today. Grief. This is a very difficult subject for me to talk about. You know, if I think about defining it, it's a deep feeling of sorrow and pain. Typically, we think about the loss of a loved one, but we can experience grief for many different reasons. When Elizabeth Kubler-Ross first came up with the stages of grief, she wasn't necessarily focusing on people dealing with grief after the loss of a loved one, but her clinical attention was to individuals who were at the end of life and watching them go through the stages of grief. That idea has evolved, and we understand that it doesn't really just deal with those people who were facing terminal illness or end of life, but it also evolved to the people who were grieving the loss of a loved one. We also understand that people could go through a traumatic life experiences, be burnt out their home, loss of a job, loss of a relationship. They could develop some chronic or terminal illness. Think about the pandemic. Think about how it changed our life. Many ways we can experience grief. When I think of grief, I oftentimes think of my very close and dear friend who I lost some many years ago. And I remember how angry I felt when I heard the news of his death. My father, he calls me on the phone. I hear his words, but I can't explain it. I felt so numb, so angry all at once. I remember my next action was to fall on the floor and in rage, just cry in tears and in frustration, because I was so hurt and so just could not. I was feeling shock. I was feeling denial. I was feeling anger and all these different emotions all at once. And I remember my first action after I got off the phone from my dad was just to get back on the phone, call my cousins, talk about what happened. And I was thinking some crazy stuff as if I wanted to find out who did it and actually take some action. Man, that's how I felt. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way around the loss of a loved one. Actually, this week is the anniversary of his death. Matter of fact, I think it is tomorrow. And I remember that week because he was in North Carolina and I was in Ohio, and he had actually lived here with me for a while. He went back to Carolina. And on that weekend, I was thinking about going to Carolina to be with him and to be with my mom and my family on that weekend. And I was not able to go. And when I heard of what had happened with him, I was just so lost. I had never felt grief like that before. I had never been in that place before at any point in my life. And the mourning, the tearfulness, the emotions that I was experiencing, and the bereavement process that I went through, I feel like it took me years to work through and come to some type of acceptance and hope. You know, I'm getting chills just talking about this, bringing up all these emotions. And so I realized, with that being said, that grief is just not something that we feel one time or feel in a few moments or in 7 or 8 days. It's not something that can be defined in a year or 2 years, but grief is, in many cases, a process that we work through. We learn to somehow accept and move through, but grief is always there with us, and we learn how to live with it versus eradicating it. And things can happen at any moment in time that can bring us back to that original feeling, that original emotion, that original experience of hurt and pain and suffering. But perhaps as we move through life, those emotions in general won't be as painful, won't be as hurtful. So we'll be able to adjust, move forward, and have positive memories about our experiences with our loved ones, and we'll carry those with us. When I think of my friend, I think of how we wanted to do something in our community. We wanted to make a difference. And when we were boys, we went to the school board and we engaged in processes to try to get more reading materials in our school reading that might be sensitive to the African American experience. We started this group called the Brotherhood, and we would connect and we would talk with many different people who had different backgrounds and religions, and we would get together and we would push for issues and circumstances or situations to help improve the quality of life. And this brother was all about reading and understanding and being conscientious, and he gave me so much. And one of the things we wanted to do was start a community center or do something to help young people to be. So I'm sitting here today before this mic, I'm talking to you, I'm expressing my feelings and emotions, and with some joy and sorrow at the same time, I say to you, I understand what it's like to feel grief. And I want everybody to understand that grief doesn't in itself, it doesn't make us weak. It doesn't make us lacking. It doesn't make us inadequate. No, grief is a normal human process in which we go through when we lose things that we love, and we want to hold on to those things. So when you go through what we might consider to be the stages of grief that we'll talk more about throughout this grief dialogue, we think about the shock, think about the denial, we think about the anger, we think about the bargaining, depression, acceptance, we think about hope. These are not pieces that we have in some linear way, but we experience grief in many different ways, and we process what we go through, and so we can have better understanding of our experience. So we don't have to be strong. We don't have to avoid our feelings. It's okay if we cry. It's okay if we talk about it. It's okay if we journal or write about it. It's okay if we want to take a walk or be to ourselves. You see, dealing with our grief is actually strength. You know, in my last episode, I talked about fear. And I don't know if I emphasized enough that to truly be brave, we must embrace the things that we're afraid of. Because to say that we're fearless actually contradicts the idea of being brave. Because see, to be brave is to have fear, but to face it. To be strong is to feel emotion, embrace it, but be able to walk through it. When we avoid what we feel to appear strong, it only really shows, perhaps to some degree, that we're really not prepared to walk through the journey that we must, because grief is a journey that we must walk, because without grief, we could never truly understand life, because life should be lived. And if life is lived, we must understand death. We must understand not all the circumstances around death, but we must accept that it is a part of life and that we will experience loss, and that death motivates us towards life and living, because we don't have an unlimited amount of time. So every day we live, we embrace the idea that this day is another opportunity to live, because while I'm here, I need to make something happen, because life is short and our days are not guaranteed. But when I can face my grief, I can do a better job accepting that and making sure that my life is lived in a way that it can have more meaning. So if you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a close friend, don't try to avoid what you're feeling. Embrace it, because when we avoid our feelings, we only fragment ourselves more. We rip ourselves apart. Because we don't deal with what our experience is. And the more we do that, the more we become fragmented. We lose the reality of ourselves. And we become like that paper falling all over the ground, all over the place. But we can do better than that. When we accept and walk through our grief, we're able to build pieces, build ourselves back together. We may not be ever exactly as we were before, and we shouldn't expect to be, but at least we can take what we learned from our experience and build a life where we become and continue to become our best selves as we walk through our grief. And to my friend that I love so much, I believe I carry him with me on the inside. I hear his voice, and it's okay. And to you out there who have those people that you've lost, that you still hear their voice, you see them on occasion, it's okay, because they're still with you in mind and in spirit. So look, we're going to have some more discussion about grief. We're going to talk about this in more depth, but I just wanted to get us started. I just want somebody to understand that grief is natural. It's a process that we all go through. We should face it, not avoid it, because in dealing with it, we will work through our emotions and feelings, and we can find some eventual acceptance and hope around our loss. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. We will be discussing more issues and concerns around grief. And in fact, Look forward to our series on grief, because this is going to be a very detailed discussion. So let's embrace it. Don't avoid it, because this is so much about life. Thank you.